Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing out here? I can't hear y'all. Ashe. How y'all doing this evening?
Good, good.
Very quickly, before we get started, I just want to do something. Small libations, something very quick. But what I'm going to say is this. I'm going to start it out by saying a name of a young black man or a black woman that has been murdered at the hands of the police. I want somebody out in the crowd to say another name. We're going to speak their names this afternoon. I'm going to start with Trayvon Martin. Ashe.
Ashe.
George Floyd.
George Floyd. Ashe. Sandra Bland. Ashe.
Breonna Taylor.
Breonna Taylor. Ashe.
Corey Jones.
Corey Jones. Ashe. Ahmaud Arbery. Ashe. Ashe to Baba Malcolm X.
Ashe.
Please. I'm going to try to go very quickly. I don't have a lot of time. So if I go over my time, just please bear with me. But I'm going to cover a lot of things here very quickly. If you have any questions, feel free to ask any questions at the end. I'm going to try to reserve some time for question and answer. I'm going to go over a brief history. Malcolm X. I'm going to also explain to you his early years. I'm going to talk about why he fell in love with the Nation of Islam. Then I'm going to explain to you, or my conclusion is going to be, in the title of this speech is, what would Malcolm X say? What would Malcolm X do? So as you heard the song, Pusha T has a song called What Would Meek Do? I don't care what would Meek Mill do. I care what would Malcolm X do? At 96 years old, what would he say to us right now based on what he has told us? So I'm going to go ahead and get into it. Quickly, I'm going to start with some quotes by Malcolm X. So as I start to talk about my speech, I want you guys to keep these quotes in mind as I start to go in. First thing, Malcolm X said in the 1950s and 60s, stop trying to integrate. Let me say that again. Malcolm X said, stop trying to integrate. That was one of the first things he said. Also, he said the goal of Martin Luther King is to get blacks to be able to go to the same restaurants as the people who enslaved them. So again, yes, he did come together with Martin Luther King at the end, but what we are talking about is what? Desegregation. We have a lot of time, 40 years after segregation, desegregation, to ask ourselves, did it work out for us? What have we gained? Okay, so now we can do an empirical analysis. We don't have to theorize. We know based off experiment and experience. Okay. Also, he said you can't integrate with the sinking ship. He also said the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments are a hypocrisy. He also said there's going to be a racial explosion. Black people are dissatisfied. He said this in 1962. Again, here in 2021, we are at the heels or getting ready to see another racial explosion by black or Africans in America, or Moors, whatever you identify yourselves as. Now, as he got a little older and got a little bit more serious, he said some things. Another quote, he said, until we are ready to pay the ultimate price for freedom, we are never going to get it. The ultimate price for freedom is death, ladies and gentlemen. I was told once I entered onto this, or into trying to help my people and uplift my people, that if you're not ready to put your life on the line doing this type of work, do not enter this work. This is a work where you don't get a lot of thanks. You don't get a lot of pats on the back. That's not what this is for. So Malcolm X, a lot of our great leaders who have been killed at the hands of the government, being killed by white supremacists, understood this. He also talked about the root cause. Back in 1962, Ronald Stokes was murdered by the police in LA, 1962. Also in that lecture, when he talked about, now Ronald Stokes was, to be clear, he was a Muslim in LA, right? He was a secretary, I think, if I'm correct. But that is something that stirred Malcolm X up. And this is why I'm going to start to show you how he starts to change and starts to get more nationalistic in his views once somebody close to him passed away. Also, he asked in 1962, remember, desegregation is 1954, so he asked 8 years after this desegregation law. And remember, this is when the 4 little girls were burned in the church in Mississippi. So he's asking, they can't pass this. The law has been passed, but they cannot enforce it. So he's asking, these little black girls got burned in the bottom of this church. What has this law, what has desegregation done for us? Also, he referred to blacks, Africans, or Moors, whatever you identify yourself as second-class citizens. That's why he said the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment was a joke. So we must be clear, in America, we are still second-class citizens today. We are still being killed by the police today. So we must understand that when he was talking about separate, this is why. Until black people, Africans, we come together, we cannot fight our oppressor and do anything economically. Also, a lot of people, when they hear him say separate, they got a little mad. But he said this: black people think that they have an investment in this country. You do have an investment. It was slave labor. No effort has been made to unite the African in America with the Africans in the Caribbean. Once these two African groups come together, then we should unite with the Africans on the continent. Keep that in mind when I'm going to bring that history together. From the Africans on the continent to the Africans in the Caribbean to the Africans here, I'm going to bring that through in this speech. So keep that comment in mind. Now again, here's one of the last quotes. How can you justify being nonviolent when little girls are being burned in a church? Another quote. If we can be sent off to war to defend America, then we should be able to defend ourselves against America. Let me say that again. If you can go fight for this country, then you should be able to defend yourself against this country. After World War I, the Black Army vets came back and were lynched from trees after they defended this country in World War I. In World War I, the white army nurses would not treat the black vets that got hurt, shot, or maimed in the war. So let's be clear what we are talking about. So meaning, we have experience that tells us there are black people that went to fight for this country and were lynched when they came back. So now we're going to get into it a little bit, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you guys for your attention. I just wanted to start off with some quotes. Keep that in mind as I get off into the speech. Malcolm X, born May 19th, 1925. Last week he would have been 96 years old. So again, the title of this speech is, what would Malcolm X do? What would he say looking at us at 96 years old? He was born in Omaha, Nebraska in 1925. His father was a Garveyite. This is very important to understand about the upbringing of Marcus Garvey. Because his father was a Garveyite, his father was forced his family to move a couple of times. He ends up in Lansing, Michigan. This is where his father was finally killed by the KKK. After his father being killed by the KKK, his mother was denied his burial rights or his insurance money. So they say she went crazy. No, she had a nervous breakdown because after moving from white supremacy, city to city, town to town, and her husband finally being lynched, put on the tracks and killed by white supremacy, of course, any black woman would have a nervous breakdown. And then not being given the rights for him to be able to get the money, that becomes very important also in Malcolm X's view. Because Malcolm X says the black woman is the most unprotected, the most neglected, and the most disrespected person on the planet, the black woman. He's saying this because, again, his dad is a Garveyite. He's going around fighting for Garveyism, but when he dies, nobody comes to help him. That's a problem we have in the black community. We don't celebrate ourselves until we die. So Malcolm X is not necessarily the NOI. He saw white supremacy kill his father. He was very clear on who the KKK was. He was very clear on white supremacy. Now, in closing, in the beginning, Malcolm X's father being a Garveyite becomes very important in understanding him in the Nation of Islam. Okay? I kind of spoke on what happened to his mother. Kind of spoke what happened to his father. So these are the things that molds a early Malcolm X or Malcolm Little at this time. Now we're going to get into his love for the Nation of Islam. The reason I'm going to bring up this point and kind of go into some different things, I brought some books here to make this point, is because if you hear Malcolm X speak, you'll hear him speak about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad over and over again. You'll hear him say what that man did for him when he was in prison. You'll hear how that man changed his way of thinking, coming from a dead plane, we can assume, okay, meaning mentally. So I wanted to take some time to explain to everyone why Malcolm X or Malcolm Little at the time fell in love with the Nation of Islam. So I'm going to read from a couple of books so you can kind of understand, and hopefully you get a bigger view as we continue to go on. Some blacks would debate Elijah Muhammad's view of the world about the white man being the devil. Of course, the Negro who doesn't want to do anything gets into the finer points of that. He's very careful to distinguish the good blacks and the bad blacks and the ones in between. He has a graduated measuring rod, and then he works them out by degree. But when the white man enforced segregation down south, the good black folk and the bad black folk sat in the back of the bus. It didn't matter. If you're black, get back. The idea how that mythology, all blacks are bad, helped maintain the racial status quo. So what we're talking about is what? The psychology of Elijah Muhammad. He's talking about that no matter if you believe in his ideology of religion, white people use this ideology against us to say black people are bad, we are criminals. They put that on the news to keep us down. So whether you agree with his ideology or not, it doesn't matter. We're going to look at the purpose or the function of Elijah Muhammad's ideology. So again, that's why we have to recognize that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was one of the greatest psychologists that we have ever had, and many of us have not come to understand that yet. Now, what do I mean by he's the greatest black psychologist we've ever had? What I'm saying is the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said the white man is the devil. He drew a line in the sand and let us know who our oppressor was and who we were fighting against. He made it very clear. The reason that's important, because I told you I'm going to tie you in a little bit of the Caribbean history. Back, I don't know if any of you heard of a guy named Dutty Boukman from the Haitian Revolution. You've heard of Dutty Boukman? Anybody heard of him? Dutty Boukman was a Jamaican. There was a leader in the Haitian Revolution, okay, a Jamaican. He got sent to Haiti because his mother was a liberator or kind of independent black woman, and to get back at her at 13, they send this guy Dutty Boukman to Haiti, because Haiti, there's a documentary out called Buck Breaking. Well, Haiti was one of the islands known best for buck breaking, breaking down black men, raping them in front of their children. Okay, so let's be clear what we're talking about. Dutty Boukman has a prayer. So during the Haitian Revolution, he drew a line in the sand. And his prayer, he says, stop praying to the white man's God. The white man's God inspires him to do evil. The white man's God enslaves you. He rapes your women. He said, pray to the black man's God. Your God inspires you to liberty and vengeance. He's saying, back during the Haitian Revolution, when a lot of people aren't educated, he's talking to slaves, that how could your God, if you're praying to a white God, how could your God enslave you and rape you and do the things and torture you? That couldn't be your God. Your God must look like you and must be black. So again, to be clear, Dutty Boukman during the Haitian Revolution drew a line in the sand. To come back, Jean-Jacques Dessalines again draws that line in the sand after Toussaint, because Toussaint was more like Martin Luther King. Jean-Jacques Dessalines goes an eye for an eye. What happens is a guy named Rochambeau kills 5,000 Haitians. Jean-Jacques Dessalines kills 5,000 French. Marcus Garvey, when you see him with the feather in his hat and dressed in his military attire, he's dressed like Jean-Jacques Dessalines from the Haitian Revolution. I just told you that Malcolm X's dad was a Garveyite. Marcus Garvey again is dressed like Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Malcolm X's dad is a Garveyite, so that brings Marcus Garvey back into it. And then a lot of people don't know Elijah Muhammad was in Marcus Garvey's security detail. So the reason why Malcolm X likes what he hears from the Nation of Islam is not just because of the religion. His father was a Garveyite. Elijah Muhammad again was a Garveyite. So he's hearing things in the Nation of Islam: separate, do for self. Why is it important that what he's talking about separate? The Nation of Islam comes into being in the year 1930. If you know your history, you know that's pretty much in the middle of the Great Depression. Great Depression starts in 1929, ends in 1933. The genius of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad lay in his ability to change or redirect the desires and tastes of the members of the nation, to in many instances create tastes and desires in them well, right? By demonizing many of the taste yet overwhelmingly popular products of the white society and many of its lifestyles, values, edibles such as wines, liquors, cigarettes, drugs, junk food, excessive eating, expensive clothing, and other consumer items and social activities. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad weaned his followers from unhealthy, economically self-defeating consumer addictions. He changed their appetites and taste for items, the purchases of which not only enriched whites and other exploitative ethnic groups, but impoverished and only harmed health of his followers and themselves. He was able to introduce his followers to save more of their earnings by neutralizing many of the tastes and desires produced in them by for white-owned manufacturing, wholesale, retail, advertising establishments. These individual families saved between $2,000 and $5,000 per person, or between $2,000 and $10,000 per family by not spending on junk food, excessive food, beers, wines, liquors, and other things in entertainment. This is in 1930 and into 1940. He saved the average black person $2,000 a year, and $2,000 back in this time is different than today. What am I saying? When you change your taste, you change your diet, you change what you wear, you have a different mentality. You can't love yourself if you clothe yourself in your oppressor's clothes. You can't love yourself if you have your children go to your oppressor's schools. Why would your oppressor teach your children to take them out of what they're doing to us? So I bring these things up very quickly to try to explain to you some of the reasons why in the 30s, why this would be a popular thing to black people looking at. You're going through the Great Depression. This is one of the worst times in history. And you have a man telling you to do for self. You have a man telling you, don't wait on the white man to do something for you. Black people, get up yourself. Start your own businesses. The Nation of Islam started tons and tons of businesses. Very, very important. So being an entrepreneur, as we see with these booths in here, is very important as a black person. These are the traits that the Nation of Islam in its early days tried to instill, but also they tried to be a protective force for black people at the time. So I try to give you an understanding of why Malcolm X, not just for the religion, but why he would look at the Nation of Islam as something that not only is popular, but something he wants to follow. And then by his leadership, he changes it to over 100,000 to 200,000 people. Lastly, in the conclusion, after George Floyd, so I'm going to talk about now in the conclusion, what would Malcolm do and what would he say? I tried to give you a brief overview of who he was and his time in the Nation of Islam. I don't have a lot of time to go into other things, but what I'm going to say is this. After George Floyd was murdered, and we protested, we marched, we sang. They started a new thing. They started to twerk now as they march. They start to dance. What has that changed for us in 2020, 2021? There's an article that just came out. Nothing has changed in the police department. As they were reading out the verdict for George Floyd, the police officer, didn't a 14-year-old girl get killed by the police? And didn't a boy get mistaken and killed in a car because the police officer thought it was a taser? What I'm telling you to separate, and I told you, Malcolm X said an eye for an eye. What he's saying is that if you continue to allow the police to kill your children, what do you expect? We're the only people that go out and march and pray when our children and our women get killed. What we have again, we have an example because Joe Biden just passed the anti-Asian hate bill for $50 million. If you remember, I think it's South Carolina where Joe Clyburn is. Is it South Carolina, Joe Clyburn? If you remember, in South Carolina, Joe Clyburn resurrected Joe Biden's election. He was getting ready to quit his election. He ran out of money. He was getting no votes. Joe Clyburn gets up and does a speech. Joe Biden wins South Carolina, then goes on from that point to get millions of dollars and go on and win the election. He comes back and asks Joe Clyburn, what do you want? He says nothing. If you hear people out here asking for reparations, there's about 55 million black people, Africans, Moors, whatever you identify in America right now. He just gave anti-Asian Americans 50 million. We can safely say that would be $1 million for every man, woman, and child, black man, woman, and child in America. Do you think that would be reparations? Could you do something with $1 million? But what I'm saying about the mental of black people is that 90 to 99% of that $1 million you just gained will go exactly right back to your oppressor because you will be wearing Gucci, Prada, Nike, and every other thing that your oppressor, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, all of these things. So even if we did get that money right now, we'll go right back to our oppressor. So I simply say, black people, the reason why it will go back to our oppressor in closing is this. I ask black people, we say slavery was way back then, but then I'm going to give you a quote by Amos Wilson in this book. We say slavery was way back then, but I ask everybody, what language do we use to communicate? We use the English language. We got that language from our oppressor. Black people say slavery was way back then. I say, what clothes do we wear? We wear the clothes of our oppressor, the uniform of our oppressor. They say slavery was way back then, and I ask you, what foods do you eat? You eat soul food. You eat the food that was given to you in slavery, the food that sticks to your ribs, the food that makes you feel good. So we still to this day gather around a table and eat slave food that was given to us. We eat chitlins, we eat livers, we eat all of these things that we got during slavery. So when black people say that slavery was way back then, in 2021, I can say, how can you say that? When I ask black people, when they say slavery was way back then, stop talking about that, I ask them, what's the name of your God? Who gave them that name? When you came here from Africa on the ships, was that the name of your God? Did you speak that language when you got here off the slave ships? And if you don't believe you came on slave ships, well then if you were here on the continent already, were you speaking that language when you got here? Or when you were here? Whatever you believe in, what we ask is for us to separate and for us to come up as a black people. We have to come within and worry about ourselves. You have to spend your money with these black people here. This is a small black economy right now that you see these vendors. When you spend your money, you know that your money, your dollar's going into this young black lady's pocket, this young black lady's pocket. And then when you spend your money with the black business, they then go invest their money to go buy more product. So then your money doubles when you spend with your black community. Are we clear that the black dollar only bounces once? Our paycheck only bounces once in our neighborhood, meaning we only spend $1 with our own people out of our paycheck? Are you clear that Jewish people, their money stays in their neighborhood 12 times? White people, their money stays in their neighborhood at least 8 times, meaning Who gives us fried chicken? Where do we go to buy it? Hooks? Do they give back to any of our schools? Who's selling us cigarettes and Lucy's and all of this stuff in these corner stores? So go out of your way. It may spend it may take an extra mile or two in gas to go spend with a black business. You may have to go seek a black business. You may have to do more than Google it. But go out of your way to spend your money with a black business. This is the only way if you get your nails done with black people, because what happens when you get your nails done with Asians? They lock you in the nail shop and they beat you, and then what? They do a 50% off sale and the black women line back up again. We must be clear on what is going on. So in closing, I appreciate everyone's attention. Malcolm X would tell us, what would he say 96 years later? He would ask us, he would say, you still have not separated. You still have not done for self. And you still have not went an eye for an eye to protect the black woman and the black child. Until we protect the black woman and the black child, the black nation will never rise, because again, we cannot protect our own. If we cannot protect our own, no other race or nationality will respect us, because as a black man, they look at us as inferior. I appreciate everybody's time. I know I went over my time. Thank you for everyone's attention. Enjoy the rest of your Malcolm X Day. If anybody has a question, let me know.